Following EU sanctions against Russia, the world expected Russia's clap back. Moscow has eventually spoken up against what it calls an injustice.
Комплексное противодействие русофобской медийной кампании и незаконным санкциям со стороны коллективного Запада.
In response, it shut out all participating countries from their oil export. How will this affect the world and Russia in the long run? Will Russia have the last laugh? You'll get the details only if you stay tuned. You probably cannot relate to this title if you've not been following the Russia-Ukraine war story. What does Russia have with other countries that it threatened to restrict oil to those areas? Well, let's take you through the story from the beginning. It started with the EU, G7, and Australia introducing legislation effective from December 5, 2020. Also called the Price Cap Coalition, the group enacted a law intended to limit the supply of Russia's oil to the world. They hoped that the country's earnings would significantly reduce by doing this. In the months preceding the Russia-Ukraine war, the EU, G7, and other countries warned Moscow of an impending sanction should they invade Ukraine. Putin was adamant and continued with the invasion on February 24, 2022. The EU and supporting countries responded with sanctions targeted at Russia's aviation, financial, shipping, economy, defense, energy, aerospace, and other strategic sectors. These sanctions will remain in place until Russia withdraws its military from Ukraine. Of all of the sanctions outlined by these countries, the price cap on crude oil hit Russia the hardest. Russia is the world's second largest exporter of crude oil after Saudi Arabia. The economy benefits from it a great deal. In fact, revenue from the sector is used to fund the war. Under the price cap, participating countries will be prohibited from transporting and providing services like insurance that enables the transportation of Russian crude oil and petroleum products. The scheme pegged the price cap at $60 per barrel. This cap is impactful for many reasons. The U.S. wields power against Russia because many service providers, like P&I Club, fall within its territory or have financial agreements subject to U.S. law. Therefore, they are bound by this legislation to do the country's bidding. On November 21, 2022, the U.S. Department of the Treasury issued a determination according to Executive Order 14071, prohibiting the following services to Russia's maritime industry: shipping, customs, brokering, insurance, trading commodities brokering, and financing. Members participating in the price cap were encouraged to read the details of the document. The UK also drafted a legislation that keeps Russia in check. On November 1, 2022, the UK government published the Russia Sanctions and EU Exit Regulations in line with the EU agreement. Under Amendment Number 16, it is prohibited to provide the following: maritime transport of Russian crude oil and petroleum products to third countries, ancillary maritime and financial services for such transport. UK parties participating in the guidelines must provide evidence that the cargo complies with the legislation. It is a criminal offense for any British company to fund and provide financial or brokering services to anyone transporting Russian crude oil or petroleum products. The EU is the chief initiator of all sanctions. Its sanction package, published on June 4, 2022, in EU Regulation 833-2014, prohibited the provision of maritime services to ships carrying Russian crude oil to third countries after December 2022. However, there are expectations for transportation and maritime services for cargoes sold at or below the price cap. All three legislatures provided a 45-day wind-down period that expired on January 19, 2023. The effects of the price cap on Russia's economy. Analysts are divided on the impact of this price cap on Russia's economy. Simon Tagliapetra is an expert who thinks the cap will not impact Russia's finances. This is because the price is near where the country is already selling. If the cap were as low as $50 or less, it would cut into Russia's earnings and make it impossible for the country to balance its state budget. To balance its state budget, Moscow must sell crude at $60 or $70. Robin Brooks, a chief economist at the Institute for International Finance in Washington, insisted that a $30 cap would give Russia the financial crisis it deserves. Russia is scared about the future of its oil industry. The world expected a reaction from Putin, and he has rightly responded. There were speculations that Indian and China buyers might go along with the cap. Today, that prediction is not seeing the light of day. In fact, Russia is already exporting oil to those countries at discounted prices to make up for its loss in Europe and America. China and Russia may set up insurance companies to replace those barred in Europe, the US, and the UK. We cannot also rule out the possibility of Moscow selling its oil using dark fleet tankers to obscure ownership. Russia is Europe's greatest oil supplier. The continent still has many cars and machines that run on diesel. The fuel is also used to power truck transport to facilitate agriculture. While it acts like everything is fine, it would be at the losing end because global prices may increase. Therefore, inflation may be looming on the continent. Moscow's response to the price cap. After weeks of deafening silence, Russia delivered the long-awaited response to Western sanctions. President Vladimir Putin signed a decree banning the supply of crude oil and oil products from February 1st for 5 months to nations that abide by the cap. It's simple. The Federation would not sell to countries sabotaging its economic efforts. The country fears the cap will have far-reaching consequences on its global energy supplies. The decree was published on Kremlin's website, where the government says it's a direct response to actions that are unfriendly and contradictory to the international law by the United States and foreign states and international organizations joining them. The decree went on to state that deliveries of Russian oil and oil products to foreign entities and individuals are banned on the condition that in the contracts for these supplies, the use of maximum price fixing mechanism is directly or indirectly envisaged. The decree has a clause allowing Putin to overrule the ban in special cases. It is expected to commence on February 1st, 2023 and end July 1st, 2023. However, it could end before the 5-month window at Putin's instance. Russia thinks the price cap is unfair in this modern day. The Soviet Union did not suffer such a fate even during the Cold War with the West. Anton Selinuanov, Russia's finance minister, said Russia's budget deficit might be wider than the planned 2% of GDP in 2023. Oil is currently trading at an average of $80 in the global market, but Russia sells below the mark. EU's alternatives to crude oil. After dishing out sanctions to Russia, Europe began scouting for alternatives to Russian energy. With consumers facing the highest energy prices, impending blackout, and potential gas rationing, analysts fear it may be worse. The affected countries are pursuing a range of replacements to cushion the effects of Russia's restrictions and the price cap. One such way is to search for new suppliers. Nearly 40% of Europe's natural gas, constituting 155 billion cubic meters, came from Russia in 2022. With many European homes and businesses dependent on this energy source for the next decade, the search for new suppliers continues. Norway overtook Russia as Europe's largest supplier in 2022 and may take center stage going forward. The UK, Denmark, and the Netherlands are also looking to boost production in this field. However, experts say it will take years for this to happen. The US has said it will increase its LNG exports to the EU from 15 BCM to 50 BCM annually by 2030 to cushion the effect of Russia's ban. This figure is 1/3 of the gas supply previously supplied by Moscow. EU may also consider buying from African countries like Egypt and Nigeria with significant reserves. Meanwhile, the Union has fast-tracked a pipeline project deal with Azerbaijan to double the country's 8 BCM gas exports annually. Another viable alternative for oil that could play out in 2030 and beyond is nuclear energy. There currently needs to be a consensus on nuclear energy among EU countries. France leads the bloc with nearly 70% of its electricity needs coming from nuclear sources. Germany had planned to shut down its nuclear plants in 2022, but the Russian invasion shifted the debate. It has halted plans to shut down 3 of its nuclear plants pending when the war ceases and life returns to normal. Other European countries like Spain, Finland, and Sweden have also increased their nuclear plant capacities to meet the current reality. Unfortunately, things are more challenging than they seem on paper. More than half of France's reactors are shut down due to some maintenance issues. Therefore, the country's export capacity is limited. Germany's reactors constitute only 6% of its electricity, and building more will take decades to complete. Ironically, Russian companies provide much of the uranium necessary to operate them. The EU has pledged to invest in hydrogen and biomethane infrastructure, a cleaner alternative to gas. Member countries have also promised to decrease energy consumption by encouraging minimal use of household appliances and turning down the heat when not in use. If these strategies are implemented, this can replace 2/3 of the Russia energy supplies to the bloc. Will Russia have the last laugh? Russia is unmoved by these sanctions because it has some secret plans. It has already sealed a deal with China to become its largest supplier, and when this comes into effect, it may ditch Europe completely. Unfortunately, the country sells at discount prices to Asia, but may have its way around the dilemma. Russia is not forced to turn a fleet of tankers to move its crude to farther locations, including areas covered by the sanction. This method is called shadow fleet. Analysts say this shadow fleet consists of 200 to 300 ships. Since Moscow had preempted it, it acquired many ships months before the EU ban. The use of shadow fleets is common in Venezuela and Iran. Most of the vessels in the fleet are known by companies in countries with lenient shipping rules. Under this strategy, a ship can change its name and ownership while in transit. Shadow fleet owners have limited exposure to the US or EU governments or banks, so the fear of sanctions is limited. While Russia's shadow fleet boats will remain, more is needed to keep Russian exports on the same level it was months ago. Experts are hopeful that more tankers may join the shadow fleet and increase revenue in no time. We'll bring you more details as the story unfolds. Meanwhile, tell us if you think Russia made the best decision restricting oil to EU member countries. Please leave a comment in the box below. Like and subscribe to this channel if you haven't. See you in another episode.